Welcome to the podcast. My name's Sarah Hamilton-Gill, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by David Fairhurst, the founder and CEO of OrgShakers. So welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you, Sarah.
I mean, I laugh about this because our journeys have not really crossed a lot in the last 30 years, but I do remember, and you probably don't remember as much as I do, but over 30 years ago, I came in to do some work when you were at Heinz. And it was quite early into your career, but I'd just started in the consulting world. So that was our first connection in terms of how we got to know each other very briefly in those days.
Oh my goodness, that was a long time ago, but
It is.
I'm sure that probably my style of HR has not changed much. So you're probably getting now what you got 20 or 30 years ago?
Do you know what? It was 30 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Crazy, isn't it? So it was one of my first pieces of work. So I remember it well. And David, so introducing David for the listeners, and obviously we'll get his side of things in a second, but over 30 years in corporate, in hospitality, retail, pharmaceuticals, FMCG. I think it's fair to say, David, that you are considered to be one of the world's leading HR professionals and, thought leaders, business communicators, and also a government advisor as well. Although you're based in Chicago now, you are actually from the UK, even though you've obviously not got any twang to your voice when you get round to having a chance to speak. So we'll talk a little bit more about other things that you do as we go through the podcast. I suppose my first question is, why did you leave the corporate world and decide to go into consulting?
Oh, great. I mean, it's a great question. And I haven't lost my British accent, thankfully. When I meet people from a few years back, they say, we thought you were going to sound different. But no, I've still kept it, although my younger kids over here are certainly American sounding. To your question, why did I go into consulting? Well, I think it takes me back to why I went into HR in the first place, really. I very clearly saw back in the day that the waves of what had happened in the workplace. And I always think of it as four waves. The first wave being the wave of transformation coming from machinery back in the day, and how that really changed the way in which work and workplaces and workers were experiencing life. And then the second wave was all about, I think they called it scientific management. It was all about the Taylorism, the Ford era, the time and motion studies and all of that stuff, which really made a step change in the efficiency in which workplaces were working. The third wave was around information, the information revolution. And back in the day, remember the huge computers that used to exist. Yeah. And I remember how old-fashioned now that some of those computers look like. I remember getting Lotus 123, I think, for the first time I was a graduate trainee and all of that. But it was making a big difference. And so, but in my mind, I thought that the fourth wave was always going to come. And it was going to come about really improving the way that people were managed in organizations. As I say, we'd had that process, we'd had that machines, we'd had that information, really hadn't optimized people in the way that I thought we could. So that was where my excitement was. I saw the opportunity of getting people more optimized in organizations. And that's why I joined this profession. I thought there was a big opportunity in it. And then, of course, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So after 30 years of working in major corporations, I wanted to have at least one chapter in my career where I was running my own business, like my granddad did, like my family have done for years. I felt that although I'd proven myself in the corporate world, going my own way, which is what I wanted to do, I felt like it was in me to do it. It was in me to run my own business, and the opportunity presented itself. And so that's where I headed. And over the years, I have to say, I've worked with a small number of consulting firms where they had not only the smarts, but also the pragmatism, the hands-on experience that organizations need. They were what I would call a trusted advisor, great strategic direction, and the ability to help me bring that direction to life. So I wanted to move in the way the family had moved into a consulting firm where the whole team have this blend of intellect, of experience, and empathy. And so that's why I went into consulting.
And it's really interesting, isn't it, that both you and I have got this family history of entrepreneurs, and that's part of my DNA. Why I went into consulting was, a childhood brought up around my father's business, and I think once it's in your blood, it can't be suppressed forever. I don't think.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I was filling shells out of, I'll say nappies, I'd say diapers over here, but
Yeah.
the minute I was filling shelves and straightening those tins on the shelves to make sure they look good. I had my own sweet shop with a P&L when I was about 11 or 12. I was trying to make some money out
Wow.
of. I had my own DJing business. So it was clearly in me. And I think there's a great excitement and thrill of being in your own business and doing things and shaping things and building things. I do think it's in the DNA, and it's quite a thrill to then try it for myself in the scale that I'm trying it.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that a lot of our listeners listen to other guests that have perhaps left the corporate world to set up as an independent consultant, but you're doing something very different. You've left probably one of the biggest roles in the world to set up a global consulting business rather than just saying you want to go it alone. So talk me through what made you decide to set up OrgShakers.
Yeah, well, OrgShakers, which is a name, by the way, I sat and thought through and did what everybody else does, which is go and look at the URLs on the website to see
Yeah,
what's available and all of that, and kept playing with the name. And I knew that I wanted a name that really described what I was about, which was, yes, about the organization, but it was also about thinking differently, having modern thoughts, having progressive thoughts, not just doing the same old. Same old. It comes back to that fourth wave. I still
yeah,
believe that there's more optimization of people to be made. So I pulled together the name OrgShakers, which for the majority of my clients seem to like. And it's a collaborative team of consultants with the main team with a minimum of 20 plus years of experience. But their values and their principles are as important to me as their expertise. That's the core team. And then there's a secondary team of HR directors who I also run, call it Org Essentials within OrgShakers, who are dedicated to our SME clients. So they go into startups and work with founders and help them grow and build a business. So I've got chief people officers, 20 odd years service, plus some specialists, a number of whom I have to say I'd worked with in the previous organizations and the brands that I'd worked with. And effectively, we have two modes of deployment within the business. One is direct, where a client knows what they need, and we send a consultant in to support them through that need, whether that be on the idea and theory end, all the way through to delivery.
yeah,
And then the second mode of deployment was what I call hub and spoke, which is where, particularly for startups or medium sized organizations going through transformation, where we appoint an HR director and then surround that HR director with us as consultants to help them be pulled in as needed. So you have a dedicated HR director, and then you have a consultant team around them. So that's sort of OrgShakers, and I'm very keen on, as I say, making sure that the OrgShakers have a certain tone, a certain style, certain principles about them to live up to that brand name.
So what made you decide, just out of interest, that you wanted to have a bigger business from day one rather than perhaps just doing it by yourself?
Well, it's this whole thought of being global, and I know a lot of people, they leave corporate and they set themselves up on their own, and then eventually they may grow. I just wanted to think differently because OrgShakers was founded as COVID was beginning to bite.
Yeah.
Workers, and the workplace have all changed since then, since COVID, and there was interesting choices. And if you look at reach and scale, most of the people challenges faced by organizations are global in their nature. And employers are looking at what's happening worldwide, not just on their own doorstep, but what's going on. And COVID was a great example where employers were looking around the world for what's best practice, how are companies dealing with this, how are they managing their employees, hybrid work, and so on and so forth. And many of our clients are now considering talent from a global perspective, a global talent ecosystem,
Right.
if you like. And so, whilst most people, as I say, would go on their own, my choice was to partner with let's get the right associations, the right partnerships, and let's build something that could be global to replicate the needs of those clients. So I chose to partner with 𝐷𝐿, which many of you will recognize that name. It's in many countries. It's a premier executive search firm, and to use a partnership with them to bring about to use effectively their business maturity, global insights, their research capabilities and scale, and at the same time, whilst being part of 𝐷𝐿, keeping the dynamics of a startup. So I wanted the agility and the pace, the modernity of a startup. And I wanted it to be big enough to matter, but small enough to care. So for me, I've got the best of both worlds. I've got this sort of a global reach, which with the thanks of 𝐷𝐿 as well, which has helped me then expand globally. At the same time, behaving in a small way in terms of personal service, in terms of attention to detail, and so on. But a couple of other points I'd make about why I went global. On a practical level, the vast majority of our work is done remotely. And so if geography isn't a barrier, then why not go global in a way that perhaps, a number of years ago, it would have been a little bit more of a pull to set up your business and have people all around the world. Now I have people working with clients and serving clients all over the place from different geographies, and almost some of our clients won't even know, and some of the accents are different to where they're actually located, like mine, which confuses everybody. So on a practical level, the vast majority of the work is done remotely, and so geography is less relevant. And we also, on a positive note, we frequently leverage time zones and geographies to our competitive advantage by effectively working in relays. So UK and US is a great example. I go to bed with something that I need sort of working to the next level for a client. I pass it over to the UK. They get up in the morning. They take it to the next level, pass it back. I pass it back. So the clients are often amazed by how much progress we can make. And that's because we utilize the time zones effectively in some of the work that we do, and of course work together closely as a team. So a few reasons there really why I felt that going big and going global was really the opportunity and time to do it.
And there's some great examples there of the benefits of what you've done. Obviously, the downside was it was just heading into a pandemic. Did that have an impact on you starting the organisation?
It certainly made it interesting. I
Yeah.
remember my first client, or one of my first clients, and I got all excited. And, in the early days, you're excited to have any client doing anything, frankly, because you love the fact that it's sort of working. And I took my first client in and we did the work and it was all great and everybody's happy. And then I'm like, we need to invoice. I spoke to somebody in the team and they said, but we haven't got a bank account. And I'm like, oh no, we haven't got a bank account. And of course, setting up a bank account in the US is quite fit. It's still way behind the banking system in the UK, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
everything's on paper, everything's faxed still, everything's stamped with humans. And so the idea of not being able to go in a branch and set up a bank account was
Oh my
became
gosh.
a real issue. I couldn't charge the client. And so anyway, so there were practical things like that were really, an interesting challenge. But in terms of the work, obviously, as COVID progressed, a lot of interesting conversations with clients as well about the workplace and the work and the workers and what they were trying to do and the challenges. And I have to say, it was a time when the HR profession as a whole was under incredible pressure and on the whole did incredibly well. And so the support that we were able to give to a number of chief people officers, HR directors, in terms of thinking, in terms of advice, in terms of, giving an independent view, it became a real good time for advisory and to help people out. So yeah, COVID is not something that I would wish for, but there in that cloud, there was opportunity around, the sort of support that we could provide.
And I think you're right, because from my perspective, 2020 was a big part of our business where people were moving from the corporate world into consulting. We had the book, we had the podcast, we had the programs, and suddenly they were kind of stacked full because they were now virtual rather
Right.
than being face to face. So, yeah, it was a very interesting time for many of us. And I think certainly the HR profession was under a lot of pressure, which gave us opportunities as consultants to grow. So, OrgShakers, I mean, you work with a range of clients from very large major corporations such as VW and Google. And like you said, you've also got the OrgShakers where you've got the fast growing startup. So you've got a great balance between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite nice actually to have different types of clients, different needs. I think, we've got the big companies, the big brands that you would recognize where we're supporting them. We typically, within some of those big companies, are really tuning into where they've got an agenda for change, particularly a
Yeah.
transformation. They want to modernize, they've gone a bit sleepy or whatever. And then you get the smaller companies and, meeting a lot of founders, and they get to a certain size and they say, oh, look, I'm not sure that we're doing things right. I've grown, I've suddenly got 1,000 people. There must be better ways of doing this. You get a lot of companies as well that are looking to move geographically. I mean, companies coming from Europe into the US, they often have a rude awakening that the US, of course, is not one mass of legislation. Every state is
Mhm.
completely different, and what you do and how you do it and who you employ and where matters. So helping companies come into the US has been something that we've also done, and making sure that we give them the learnings about how to get it right. So yeah, I think the variety is really good, and it makes life interesting. And as I say, we have that dedicated team that just do the startup work as well, which in itself is very different to some of the consulting work. But yeah, having the variety is good. But one thing's for sure is that whichever industry you're talking about, whether it's those that employ a lot of people, they've all been struggling. They've all been struggling with attraction and retention, and there is no doubt in my mind that the people agenda, and probably coming out of COVID as well, the people agenda is no longer contained to like the sort of people unit. I've got a lot of CFOs that are now a lot more interested in the people dimension post COVID, because
Mm.
they saw the impact of the people bit not working, coming back to that fourth wave. They
Yes.
saw the
Yes.
impact on their finances. So there is a lot more cross C-suite interest in people. And therefore, there is a lot more pressure, stroke opportunity for HR people to show what they can do within that space. But the appetite for change, the appetite to leverage people coming out of COVID and with a massive labor shortage in most places around the world, put all that together, and the people focus is right at the center of the C-suite conversation right now.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, it's not settled down since the pandemic. It's only got worse, if anything. And so having those conversations at the CFO level is going to be really important.
There's just putting in context what's going on really in the world of HR. And it is an exciting time, and I've said how much pressure the HR function's been through, and it's a time of opportunity. But there are some fundamental shifts that the HR profession, which in the main are our clients, are facing. The first off is what I would call the workforce cliff. Back in 2014, I'm on record in the Financial Times newspaper saying that due to some data that I'd privileged to be analysed at a European level, I discovered that there was going to be a supply and demand of labour issue that was going to be pressing around the world. In other words, not enough babies had been born,
Yeah.
and 20 years ago, and that I knew by country, by country, part of the world, when this was going to hit. And Germany was one of the first to get hit. Netherlands was shortly after, the UK a few years later, the US. So basically, the shortage of labour was always going to become an issue around now. And so to some degree, COVID, which is what we focus on it, was a bit of a smokescreen, is that
Right.
there were not enough
Interesting.
babies born 20 years ago. It's not helped, and there's been some shift in some sectors to other sectors who are more attractive and so on and so forth. But effectively, the supply and demand curve was going to go out of sync anyway. And so this challenge that we've got now around this focus on attraction and retention is a word that I've said for years I hate. It reminds me of like prisons, keeping people in walls, keeping people contained.
Yeah.
I like engagement better than retention. But anyway, retention's on the lips of most of my clients, as is attraction. And so that is something, whether it be the care sector, whether it be the education sector, whether it be the health sector, whether it be the retail sector, hospitality sector, they're all struggling for people. And so, this is something that's not going to go away quickly. Interesting, for a number of years, it's been very popular to be politically to be anti-migration. You remember
Yeah.
back in the Trump of building his wall and so on and so forth. Well, interestingly, only yesterday or 2 days ago, Germany is looking at opening its border again to migration in a way that may well set a new standard. It's not yet passed, but they're certainly talking about it. And Germany being, the largest economy in Europe, if they do something, it will get noticed. So it's really interesting time about, immigration, migration, the need for labor, the shortage, the attraction, the impact. This is on the lips of most of the HR people. So interesting to watch what happens in Germany. Another thing that's happening, of course, not just the shortage of people, but humans and technology. I always like to tell the story. Remember, we won't remember because we're too young. But if you look at ATMs, or we call them cash points, right,
Yes,
in the
yeah.
UK, when they were introduced, there was a massive frenzy in the media about how jobs and banks were going to have to close because the ATM was going to take over humans. And then when, prior to that, I guess, but when Excel came in, Microsoft Excel,
Oh, yes.
there was a similar scare, which is Excel's going to everybody that's got maths ability is going to be, out. All these people with these brilliant skills are going to be outdone. This system's going to take over all their jobs. And of course, both were proven not to be the case. In fact, the banks, in terms of sites and employees, increased after ATMs. The amount of engineers to fix those cash point machines became a whole new career. And Excel, yes, there was less bean counters, but there was more people doing the analytics on the back of what Excel could produce. So what we're seeing now is this interesting era of humans and technology where there's a lot of scaremongering around AI and around the metaverse, a fear for jobs. What's it going to do? And you can see that you read the headlines, Google it. It's amazing how much is coming through, calls for legislation to try and control it. The reality is, and this is my view, is that very few jobs will be replaced in the foreseeable future by AI. In fact, in the latest research I saw, it was 7%. The majority of jobs are going to have a new co-worker. The new co-worker is technology. So just as the ATM worked alongside the bank tellers, the AI and the metaverse and all the stuff that's coming will work alongside humans. So there's an interesting job here, a really interesting job for the HR function to get hold of, which is what I've heard referred to as couples counseling. It's helping humans and technology be super together, as opposed to treating them as enemies, as a threat to jobs and society. It's not going to happen. And so I think this is the second trend after the workforce cliff, the humans and technology and how we can help our clients and our clients help themselves, and a role for HR in couples counseling. Third one I would share with you is the end of jobs. So I think I'll explain it like this. I'm on record for years saying that I hated job descriptions. I've hated them for years.
I hate them as well.
I know that people say they love, and it helps, and it gives a basis for lawyers to argue and whatever. But I hate designing the workplace for the 1% of problems that you sometimes get with people who do silly things, right?
Yeah.
I hate designing performance management systems that's so cumbersome for the 99% of people that just want to be motivated and work well, just to deal with the people that need dealing with. So let's not design for the minority. So I always say, let's design for the majority. And in my mind, job descriptions have no role. And so you could argue that in the history of the workplace that we're in now, the work that we do, literally on a day-to-day basis, has never been so opaque. What people do, a lot of it's in their heads. Back in the days in the fields, right, you could see what you could do, you could copy what somebody did, you could learn, you get your apprenticeship there. Now, a lot of it's in heads. A lot of what people do isn't that obvious. So one of the things that we need to be thinking about here is looking at work versus jobs. So rather than constructing jobs into a thing, that's what you do, here's your job description. What are the tasks that you do? And indeed, in the organization, who should do them? Which should be given to technology? Which should be outsourced? Which should be done by a consultant like us? Which should be done by somebody who's employed? Etc., etc. So this whole focus on tasks, dissecting tasks, understanding what people do. And it's very important, if for no other reason, is that, particularly in a virtual world, is I'm concerned about the loss of apprenticeships, where, the younger in their careers used to watch what other people did in meetings and watch how they behave and watch how they handle themselves. Well, as a colleague of mine has said recently, we need to practicing working out loud. We need to start getting out of the system what's happening in terms of these tasks so that people can learn from it for the next generation coming through.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in what you've just said in terms of the complexities of what's going on, but I share also your concern about the younger generation coming through. And, you and I have both worked in very large retailers, and, it was a really important part of the journey when you started in the retail sector that you had, role models around you, you had interaction, you had comms, you had, how to work out team working. And the virtual world just doesn't have that for people. So I get concerned for the younger generation as well.
Yeah, and but there's things we can do. It's a good thing. I mean, if you
Yeah,
think of
yeah,
the virtual workforce that you just talked about, if you think of synchronous versus asynchronous work, so in other words, when things are done together in a meeting room, that's one thing. You can see people, you can have discussions. But asynchronous work is more where it's being passed from one to the next, right? So it's from me here, pass it to somebody else who's working at home, pass it to somebody else. Asynchronous work needs to be dissected and thought through, because by doing that, you can also think, okay, as we're passing it efficiently from me, I could pass what I do, even though I'm working at home, I could pass it to a piece of technology who then does something with it in AI, who then passes it to my next co-worker who's living in the UK, who then passes it to somebody else who's in China. So as we think about redefining the workplace, no longer being all about synchronous work, we need to really get clever. And whether it be the workforce cliff, whether it be humans and technology and that couples counselling, whether it be the end of jobs, or whether it be about redefining this type of work in an asynchronous way, the role of HR is so fundamental. So it's a very exciting time, but a very demanding time for that profession. And HR can't do it alone, which is why good independent thinking, seeing what's going on, scanning the horizon, and consultants can add value to all of these things, which are going to put a lot of pressure on the HR function.
yeah. And so leading on from what you've just said is from your experience of working with your clients and seeing other consultancies as well, what do you think are other areas that organisations are investing in at the moment, apart from talent attraction and retention?
Where I'm seeing investment reflects the trends that I've highlighted. I think first
Yeah.
of all, organization design. With this redefinition of work and the workplace and the worker, and the end of jobs into tasks, and the efficiencies that a potential recession are driving for, and the interest of the CFO now in the structural work and so on and so forth. Org design is a big focus right now. I have to say, I don't like the word org design. To me, that always depicts it's like job descriptions. Like, you pull off a design, you get a big consultancy in who's been around forever. They come in, they print off the new structure. Here's what you need. Here's the spans. Here's the science. Here's what other companies do. Here's how many people you need. Here's how many people to throw out. And the thing dies about 10 minutes later because it's a static thing. I prefer org dynamics. And the name represents
Right.
something for me. It's more of a philosophical difference. So, let's remember that org charts are only at best ever a broad approximation of reality. Have you ever seen an org chart and think that's exactly what that explains me and exactly how I work? Absolutely not.
No.
And things change so much, and these tasks are challenging us, and the technology. So we need to be thinking about creating a more dynamic review of organizations, so that we put in a philosophy where we set some principles, we set some governance, and constantly we're readjusting, like a plane readjusts.
Yeah.
Planes don't fly in straight lines. They constantly readjust their wings in order to go straight. That's what organizations should do. So that's the first thing, is like org design, or org dynamics, as I would prefer to call it. The second area, really, I would say, is coming out for organizations investing is around culture. And by culture, I'm really talking about the employee experience, redefining the workplace, human capital optimization. So that side of it. And, culture is no longer seen as a soft word. Embracing culture is seen now as a way of accelerating growth. And good organizations have realized that, there's something in this. It's no longer a soft topic. I mean, I remember back in my days when I was doing my masters, for example, talk of culture and whatever was always seen as the sort of softer side of the profession. Yeah. Now
Absolutely.
it's totally the core. So culture, measuring it, getting value from it relative to employee experience. The third one, no surprise, HR technology.
Yes.
And really, the issue that we've got in HR technology right now is that there's about 20% of large companies are now on a cloud-based HCM system and be about 8 years in. So there's going to be a lot of companies right now, bigger companies, looking at what's the next technology for HR. And of course, none of the current HCM systems, to my knowledge, are based on an AI code design. So if you think
Yeah.
about all this AI stuff and whatever, they're all basically systems of record. They're very logical. They can be very useful. Employee training records, driving payroll, and whatever. But in terms of real intelligence around driving employee experience, none of them were designed for that. And a lot of them are coming up for maturity. So it's going to be really interesting to look at the overall tech space. Who's investing in what. There's no slow up in HR technology investment, I will tell you. It dipped a little bit during COVID, and I've seen the numbers, but it's now back, and it's still high on the opportunity list and priority list of most of our clients and what I'm seeing in the research. So HR tech's not gone away. There's a little bit of an interesting period of time before the true AI-enabled HCM systems come into play. And there's a lot of dissatisfaction, both with suppliers and the employees with HR technology.
Interesting.
Do you know what the number one issue with HR technology is? Implementation right now? By a factor of like 60%. Number one factor, employee adoption. Employers and managers saying we don't like it.
Oh dear, that's
So
not a good start, really.
exactly. So basically, there's a lot of HR tech work comes in, a lot of OD, a lot of culture work and employee experience. So that's what I'm seeing coming through. I think the diversity work is coming back. I think it went a little bit quiet when we hit the COVID period. I think about 4 years ago it was high on the list. I think it's now moving back. But as I say, it's those other three that are really prominent in the requests that I'm hearing right now.
Interesting. And are there any differences on a global perspective in
I
terms
know.
of?
I mean, you get some regional variations. I was in Saudi Arabia only 2 weeks ago teaching about HR and technology. Interestingly enough, China is the number one Ipsos research. China is number one in its excitement of AI. US is 38th,
Crikey.
which is
Okay.
really interesting. So there's a lot more cynicism and caution and whatever. Guess who's number two? Number two is Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in
Interesting.
terms of its excitement for AI capabilities. And I will tell you that only 3 weeks ago, they created their own chat GPT in Arabic because they said nobody else was going to do it. And so they're going to do it themselves, which, as you know, is really,
Very
tricky coding
difficult.
because it works
Very
backwards, the
difficult. Yeah.
language and that. And so basically, it'd be a really interesting time, I think, for places like the Middle East and Saudi from an HR perspective, when not all their HR practices have been at, the front end of the queue, but it may well be an opportunity for certain places around the world to excel on this human tech interaction in a way that we've not seen before. And so I think it's interesting. So yes, there are cultural differences. There are differences geographically around the world. But in terms of the needs of issues with attraction, retention, humans and technology, redefining the workplace, they're pretty consistent around the world. So yes, some variation, but pretty consistent themes.
So if we kind of reflect on everything you've said, in fact, reflecting on your time, it is actually the best perfect timing, really. Perfect storm 2 or 3 years ago when things are very volatile, and now all of these other challenges that are coming to place. You're very well positioned as an organisation to take advantage of this from a global perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I was probably slightly lucky with the name because in terms of shaking things up, there's nothing like a pandemic to shake things up. So it was totally tuned into disruption and change. And, I don't know whether it would have been easier or not, but it certainly created an appetite. And what's more importantly, it's not just an appetite within HR trying to push the HR agenda. It's an appetite across the C-suite about what are we doing, and with founders and with CEOs. So more and more interest. But, I've learned a lot in the process of creating OrgShakers. I'll probably pull up on 3 or 4 things here that I would say I learned in the time that I've done it. And the first thing that I learned about creating any consultancy really is about purposefulness or intentionality. You go into this, you get excited, you get the thrill of, oh, I'm my own boss, and here's my desk, and here's whatever. But beyond that, you can't just hope to be successful.
No.
Hope's not going to be good enough. You need a plan, and you need to be disciplined. And, a lot of people said to me, maybe David, on business development, you seem quite natural at it. And other people, it's a bit hard, this BD thing. And I said, BD is all about discipline, right? It means that when you get up in the morning, you think, oh, let's send out 20 LinkedIn requests. Who were the last 3 people I haven't spoke to that I thought I'd send a note to? I remember somebody taught me once that said he sent 3 emails a day. And in the emails, he sends cold emails to, hey, I was thinking about you. I saw your business in the press, and just a little tailored paragraph. He sends 3 a day. And that in total created him into a successful business person with a big brand. But so to me, it's not some clever, big, charismatic BD skill. It's about the discipline of, have I got a list? Am I following up? Am I trying to apply myself to people's problems? So for me, it's about rigor and discipline, and intentionality about how you do things. But you also need to think outside in. So you need to be thinking, it's different. You don't realize when you're in corporate just how much you think inside out. Yes. Right? You think about the business and what you're doing to people, what products you're producing for people. When you're in consultancy, you're immediately thinking about what is it what do they need? What is their issue? What is the thing they need fixing? So you've got to put yourself on their seat and think outside in. That does take an adjustment because you're so used to being on the inside that when you're on the outside, so thinking outside in, and then you need to be, speaking to your network, to crystallize your thinking. So again, being very purposeful about using your network. And when you reach out and ask for help, I will say, I don't know what's in it, and whether I'm saying this as a Brit, I don't know, but you always assume that people are a bit reluctant to help. But in my experience, 99.9% of people, if you reach out and ask for help, will help you.
I think you're right. It's a big surprise to many of the people that come through our boot camp when they realise that the community they're in are so supportive. And so it is a big surprise, but it's great to know.
Yeah, and I'm calling it out because, I find saying that to a lot of people, sometimes people who are in career transition and whatever, and I say to them, let's go through your network, let's look at your LinkedIn, let's look at who you're connected to. And I said 99% of these top 50 that you should go to will do something for you.
Yeah,
right.
I agree
So that's the first thing, is being intentional about your network, about talking to people to crystallize your thinking, about thinking outside in, and about planning and being disciplined. So that's purposeful intentionality for me. The second area is about collaborative. And it's the second thing I've learned is the first, what I've seen, and it's a real turnoff in some consultants, is as I was looking around people who are doing what we do, is that they get obsessed about their competition and they get obsessed about intellectual property. Right. So obsessed that it's like they put their arms around it. They're hiding the briefcase, and particularly when they're new at it, they get so obsessed that they know something and it's worth something and they've got to keep it in. And I remember an old boss of mine back in retail that said, very famous guy actually, said, don't be obsessed about the competition. If all you're doing is looking over your shoulder, watching everybody else, you'll walk into a wall.
Great advice.
And the advice was, stop looking over your shoulder, stop worrying about everybody else, and just be good at what you do and drive client needs. So this for me is about thinking about individuals and organizations with adjacent capabilities. So for example, there are tech solutions providers that you can talk to who may well, may well refer things to you as an HR consultant, or vice versa. Or you may create a partnership with them. Working collaboratively with potential clients as well. So that to me is about, and it can feel like a brave step, but openly sharing knowledge and ideas with clients. Anybody that says, I'm going to give you a smoke screen, we do this really clever thing, but I can't really tell you how we do it until you pay me, are going to get nowhere. And it happens every day.
Yeah.
So openly showing stuff, models, what you've got, because it will pay off. It will come back in the long term. I often hear consultants get really obsessed about intellectual property. They're almost having you sign a non-disclosure agreement before you even speak to the client. It's not about that. And the reason it's not about that is because it's about building trust. Now, I remember back in the day, years ago, when I used to be doing quite more on the circuit, used to talk a lot about employee reputation and that side and how to build it. And I said, you know what, if you look at the models of building trust, it's exactly the same building trust in employer reputation. But by the way, it's exactly the same building trust when it comes to delivering a business like this. And there are 4 or 5 drivers of trust, right? So the first one is, these are the things that make people trust you more, right? And they're all common sense. Proximity. So you trust people who are closer to you, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to get on a plane every time, but it does mean that somebody will trust you more if you're physically present. Yeah. It also means that if you're closer to what matters to them. Second thing, familiarity. How familiar are they with you and what you do? And again, playing little covert games about, I've got all this clever stuff, but I can't. That's not good. Being totally familiar is what you need to do to build trust. Similarity. So I'm like you. So clearly, for those of us who've worked on the inside of an organization for so many years, I will play to, I'm very similar. I know what you're going through. I know what this issue is. I know how tough this will be. I am similar. I've been through that training. Similarity can also be, I went to the same university. I went to the same college. This is a big thing in America, by the way.
Right,
Americans often identify each other by which team they support, which college they went to, which church they go to. In a way, the Brits don't do that, but they categorize people in America. And so they look for similarities. And, it's difficult for somebody like me with my accent because I didn't go to their college. I don't go to their church. I'm not supporting their team. So therefore, where can I find similarity between me and the person I'm dealing with if I'm trying to build business in the US?
Yeah.
Consistency, the last 2, consistency is important. And again, consistency is, if you're an OrgShaker and that's your brand and that you're always looking for new ideas, you need to be consistent in delivering that. If you're talking about quality, sending an invoice full of mistakes is not consistent. So consistency, that whenever they get you, morning, noon and night, week after week, they always feel that same drive. And then finally, authenticity, right? You've got to be yourself. So these are the things that drive trust. If I feel somebody shows me what they can do or even tells me what they can't do, what they're not good at as a consultant, I'll tell you, I'm really good at this. I'm less good at that. People like me for this. It's not my favorite, but I do it, but I'm good at this. People like the authenticity. So these are the things that build trust. Trust building strategies is what consultancy is about. To be a trusted advisor, you're not only going to know your stuff, but you've got to show you care and share a smile. 3 things. I always advocate for that. Share a smile, know your stuff, show you care. And in order to do that, you then build trust, which then builds repeat business and people giving you a chance. So that's the second area. So the intentionality was first, collaborative was second. Third is about value generating. I will tell you that there's so many calls on money when you're setting up a consultancy. You could spend every day and it all feels exciting. I want this new system. I want this new software. I want this new laptop. I want this new everything.
Yeah.
Why don't you invest in this lead generator? Why don't you invest in? And they're all asking for money. Well, the third point I've learned really is you've got to be ruthlessly commercially savvy on your ROI. So yes, you should do ROIs. Yes, you should do choose investments. Yes, you should be brave. As my granddad said, no point being penny wise and pound foolish, right? So yes, you have to. I remember taking 4 or 5 of my team to Miami to meet a potential client. I took them all down there. We had a nice time. We had a dinner as well without the client as well. We had a bit of time together. But you know what? We got the client over the line. It paid for the entire thing. So sometimes you take brave steps. That cost me a lot of money to take, 6 people down to Miami. But of course, then it paid off. So you've got to invest to accumulate, but you've got to do it wisely and intentionally. And then finally, and I will shut up, is inclusivity. As you build an organization, this is my fourth learning. As you build an organization, you won't have all the ideas and you won't have all the knowledge. And in fact, the scope of your organization won't probably be right. But you've got to embrace and explore. I'll give you an example. Recently took on a consultant who he's really specialized and is specialized in finance. Not in
Right.
delivering finance, but in supporting the HR side of finance. Helping a CFO build a new function, helping a CFO with the structures. He speaks the language, helping the skill set of finance being built. So he is an HR finance specialist, quite niche. Now, is finance HR something that I would have focused on as I set this business up? Absolutely not. Is it very adjacent to what we do? Yes, it's the HR part of a technical function. And so really being inclusive by allowing yourself in the business to deviate and to explore different opportunities. Certainly in the early days, look, we'd have taken on any business because we were brand new and we're just desperate to get going. Now, you can certainly direct the business towards the type of businesses that you want and the type of work that you like doing, but really being open and inclusive. One of the instruments that I used is called Prism. I use the Prism as well with the team. Think of it as a psychometric, a pretty good one, to really get to know the team, the differences in their styles, because by doing that and being inclusive of different people, you're obviously going to have better matches on pitches with clients. And so, again, what I've learned is it's not about cloning. A lot of people who are working in OrgShakers have worked with me before. I know them well and it's great, but they are different. They are different personalities. They are different expertise. They have different looks on life. That's important. And it's important not to then create, a whole body of the same as me. So, because that's not going to serve the needs. So those are the learnings that I would pull together about the intentionality, the collaboration, focusing on value, and being inclusive to the point that you're allowed to deviate from perhaps what you thought you were going to be doing in the first place. So a little bit long-winded,
Amazing.
Sarah, but
No,
I just
no,
wanted
very,
to
very, very
share some
valuable.
thoughts.
And I think finally, really, is if somebody's kind of sitting on the fence and possibly thinking about going into consulting or setting up as an independent consultant, what kind of one piece of advice would you say to them if they're just thinking about it?
Well, I've experienced now a number of people coming over from corporate into consulting, and I've also hired people who are in consulting and stayed in consulting. There is a real benefit, by the way, of people coming over, feel fresh, as I would call it, from a corporate where they've got that experience, they've felt the pulse of the business, they understand the reality. Because my business, OrgShakers, is, as I say, it's not just about being smart; it's about knowing how to really deliver and get things done. So, and to think differently and open-mindedly. So, I've seen people coming across, but I would say this, which is it is a significantly different mindset being on the consultancy side. It is exciting. It's very exciting. You've got a lot of autonomy. You've got the think time. You've got all the things you wish you'd done before of looking at different models. And it's exciting. It's interesting. It's stimulating for those who've got that intellectual curiosity. But it's also quite challenging. You never know quite what's around the corner. No 2 days are going to be the same. It's not as predictable as getting in your car, doing the commute, going to your office and knowing what the meetings are. It's not going to be like that. So it is a different mindset. And it will play to different attributes in a different way. So it's the adaptability of coming from a corporate into having an entirely different, where you do have to think about clients. You have to think outside in. You have to think about solving people's needs. You have to be up on your reading. You have to be able to, and confident enough to really do BD. But remember, BD is about discipline. That's what I said. But the one thing I would say is that the transition takes about 18 months, roughly. You get some people who come in, they're flying, and it's great. But in the majority of people will take about 18 months to really settle into it, learn the way, and feel comfortable. So as long as you're going to give yourself mentally an 18-month transition, that's good. But it doesn't just happen overnight. It happens over a period of time. But final thing I would say is it's such an exciting place to be. Never before has there been a more important time to be in the space. And as companies are thinking differently about managing their HR strategy, from what goes to tech, what goes to tasks, what goes to consultancy, there's lots of really interesting, valuable work that can be done, and some major people challenges around the world in this fourth wave that's yet to be optimized of transformation in the workplace.
Absolutely amazing. Really interesting. And I'm sure our listeners will find this whole podcast a real insight. And obviously, the show notes below will have the details of OrgShakers and yourself. So we encourage people to reach out to you and connect with you. And, really appreciate your time and going through this in so much detail. And, I really enjoy looking to see what OrgShakers are doing going forward. And 30 years on, who knows what might be happening in the next 10 to 15.
Well, hopefully we've got the intentionality to make it grow and be even more successful. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share and be helpful. For those who know me, I would always be one of the 99.9% that would be helpful if people reach out, and feel free to do so. And, thank you for sharing. And together we'll be stronger, particularly as a consultancy industry. We can stand on each other's shoulders and be even better. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's been great.
Brilliant. Really appreciate it, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for this episode of Leap into HR Consulting. It would be really great if you could share this with your friends and your peer group that might be interested. Find out more about anything that we've talked about by visiting our website, leapintoconsulting.com. And until next time, onwards and upwards.